Don't make this last too long. After my father got rid of the cans at the factory, we stopped at, and I'm not quite sure whether my aunt and uncle owned what was Ford Fridays. Do you remember Ford Friday?
I know where it was, yeah.
They had an ice cream parlor, and they sold magazines and bread, you know, different things. They weren't a full
Grocery store, like.
store, no. And I used to stop there. My father stopped there every morning, and I got my free ice cream cone. That was the highlight of my
Your summer
trip to
days.
Stanfordville with the milk cans.
Okay.
Then going to school here, I came here. I started third grade here from Clinton Corners. I went 2 years down there in the little schoolhouse. And then my mother, at that time, had taken charge of the New York Telephone Company. And because it was in our house where we lived.
Where was your house?
On Jameson Hill. And it was just a little ways off of Clinton Road, you know. So they shipped me because she had one kid besides me, and she was pregnant. And so I got boosted over to my grandparents on Knight Road, where I was there a couple of years, and then I was back home again. I was old enough to help take care of kids.
What were your grandparents' names?
Lumen, Marie and John Lumen, and they had bought where, what's his name is, the rich man.
Bonnecue?
Bonnecue.
Bonnecue's farm.
That was their farm there that Bonnecue bought. So, and I had some happy years there. I loved the place. I loved the big wide porch they had on it at the time. I used to play house out there in the summertime. And my grandparents had boarders in the summertime, people coming up. We used to go up to Anson Crossing and meet the train there and of course it was a horse and buggy that brought them down at the time. And once in a while there was kids with them that made it nice to have somebody to play with. Otherwise I had to make my own
Fun.
playtime, you know.
Did they have a name for their house on Knight Road? You know how some of the boarding houses had names?
No, not that I remember that they named it. And but we used to have full house, and we had a neighbor that lived just down the road, Jucket, and they pressed apples in the summertime for cider and stuff. And I don't really know what the two brothers did. One of them was married, and his wife used to come and help with the cooking and do the dishes and stuff for my grandparents. My grandfather had, a small dairy, not too many cows, but, and I had a horse that I was able to ride, and my morning thing in the summertime was to go collect the cows from the pasture that was way up on the hill in the back. And I used to get up there and watch the sunrise and bring the cows down for them. Now, what else do you want to know?
Did you go to the school on Knight Road? Was the school
No,
on Knight Road?
no.
No?
became my sister-in-law was a teacher there at one time, Burkowske. And that was back before my time.
How did you end up on Upton Lake?
I married a Burkowske. And we own the land on the back side of the lake. Oh, part of it. When my father and mother-in-law came up from Baltimore, they bought the farm, and I forget the name of the people that they bought, but there was so many people in that at one time that I can't remember the ones that they bought it from. Well, anyway, they owned right to the cul-de-sac where Patricia Lane comes in, if you know that.
Yeah, you know it.
My father-in-law sold it to Mr. Hoig for $1,000, part of that, because our land went right to that. He just wanted the lake part of it and the railroad part. And we own part of the railroad from where we are now to the school, which the school owns.
When you say
on the
school,
other side.
Upton Lake Christian School?
Yeah,
Are there remnants of the railroad on your property?
yeah.
Like what remains?
It
from the
makes a
railroad?
good road to come in on.
It's pretty much your driveway coming in?
Yeah.
So,
But where we come in now, I mean, we can go out to Patricia Lane and out because we bought a piece of property there from Drake, on the Drake property from when they were selling. So we can go that way. But at the time, we own the land that comes in what they call, I never can remember the name of it. I always liked Bridle Way, and when it was changed, I never liked it, so I never remember it. But anyway, we come in there across from the old house where we lived, right there where Mallon's are.
no, okay, so where are
Yeah, we
Mallon's?
come down between those fences that are falling down now.
Okay,
And when Oscar and I were first married, most of that was swamp. And my sister-in-law, who was married to Henry, her father owned a gravel bank, and he gave us permission to draw gravel in and put on that so we could get more easily to the back lots that we had back there and the where we put the young stock in the summertime. But it took quite a few loads, I mean, for the swamp. And then when we sold it, the property to Empert, he made the pond there. And ever since then, Dorothy's house, that's right across from the cemetery, that's had water in the basement.
oh, really?
Yeah, because you tell people what things were like, but city people don't pay any attention to you, if you know what I mean. And they have, the pipe collapsed where we put a pipe across the road to keep the swamp drained and go out. But that collapsed. So the new owners that came in, they did it higher up, but the water doesn't flow all the time. Mm-hmm. And it makes, of course, my son owns the property now, and it makes for, you know, dampness in the house and everything else. Mm. But the sump pump is going all the time. Now, what else do you want to know?
Well, when you lived, what about like on Upton Lake? Because there was a beach area, there was like wasn't there a carnival type thing?
Yeah, when we were kids, there was a ball team. Every Sunday they played, weather permitting, they played baseball, and we used to come up and us kids used to go swimming. And of course there was a stand there, and we got treated to ice cream, and usually if we saved any money we made doing things, we used to spend it there. You know how kids are.
Where was the ball field
That started right on our property, and it went over to around where Schulhoff owns property now, and I think Toby's got pictures of that bridge, Toby Riccadilly.
Oh, okay.
So if you want pictures of it, he's got a lot of information there on the lake.
Actually, he's on my list to interview. Yeah, he's got.
Yeah, he's got a lot more things on it. And I did have pictures at one time of the ice houses that was up on the cove that's in the back of the lake there.
Is that the cove where the lake associations got their property?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they were on there, and there was like a railroad track or something that they used to bring the ice up. And well, Henry told me about, they had the horses, and they had a marker that they marked off the ice cakes, and that's what the farmers did in the wintertime. They harvested ice, and they had an engine that would pull that up and take it into the ice houses. And of course, men were in there and placing the ice bricks or whatever you want to call them, and chinking in between to keep it, so they stayed cold.
Mm-hmm. Was there an actual track that went out into the lake? Oh, like over into the lake?
There was like a railroad track, I think, that went into there. Somebody had it that a train went in there, but no train ever. But that's what that was for the ice. And of course they had an engine. But anyway, they had a horse. They took a team of horses out, and they had a thing that marked the ice cakes, so they could come with a saw and do it. And they had chokers around the horse's neck. And once in a while, one of those horses got on a loose piece of ice, and he went in. And that's the only way that they could keep them from drowning and
pull them back out.
Get them back out. So.
But was there an actual amusement area
There was, yeah. It was a park, and it was a circle, and you could sit around it and an oval like. And of course, that's all filled in today. People, that bought houses, and fixed them up. All those houses at one time that were built there were from lumber, from buildings that were taken down in Poughkeepsie, because the man was a building inspector in Poughkeepsie, but he owned property out here. And they built those houses and rented them out in the summertime.
Are those the houses like along Grove Way?
Yeah, that's around there.
And that's where Anderson Road is too? Is Anderson Road in there also as well, or is it only Grove? I don't know all the names of the roads down.
Well, I don't know what they call the one that comes off of Grove Way that comes in.
Yeah, I don't know that one either.
I don't know what that is. You know what they called it from the one that comes in by Hicks's, that comes in on those houses. They called it Indian Trail.
Right, that I've heard.
Yeah.
One I've heard.
And just where that goes down into there now, whether that's continued on that road, but that's what my kids always called it, the Indian Trail, you know, that's what it was known as.
The amusement area, where was that, so that was down by Grove Way, that end of the lake?
Yeah,
That
up
was
on the
there?
hill there where all of those houses are, where you come up. Yeah. And they used to have concerts there in the summertime. They had a Ferris wheel. What else did they have there? Oh, they had a bunch of kids, you know, for kids, for amusement and stuff. And they used to park in the lot where Oscar has his house now. They call that was their parking lot at one time. So,
Was Drake Road, is that named for Henry Drake that lived down there?
yeah.
So he actually owned that property down
He,
there?
he got it from an uncle that owned it, Hoig.
H-O-A-G, is that the?
Hoag, yeah.
Huh.
He was a nephew, I believe, and he inherited that.
And he was fire chief down in East Clinton
Yeah,
for years. And
yeah.
then he was fire chief up here too on
Yeah,
Stanford Forum.
and boy, he was a deputy sheriff too, and he was a real stinker. You better blot that out.
Your hand's on the microphone.
Oh, maybe you didn't get that. The good thing.
But, yeah, I never associated the Drake Road being with Henry Drake.
Yeah,
Until
that's
you just
Henry
said
Drake.
that.
Yeah, it was named after the Drake family.
Were
Yeah.
the Uptons still on the lake at that point too, with their place?
Upton's at one time, I think, owned our place. And they owned a big section of
yeah.
land.
Yeah, big chunk of the property around.
Yeah.
And wasn't their house was actually up on Salt Point Turnpike though?
Yeah.
On the corner there by,
Yeah.
I don't even know
And
what
why
road
they
it is.
ever took away Upton Lake Road, I'll never know, and made it Salt Point Turnpike.
Oh, you mean they renamed it?
It used to be from the Parkway was Upton Lake Road to 82. And then all of a sudden we got changed, and everybody grumbled about it.
I wonder where they got the Salt Point from. Oh, did it have maybe something to do with
Well,
the
that-
cows or?
I don't know.
Farming?
The state has got to do with that, I guess. And because it starts there in Poughkeepsie on the eastern thruway there, you know,
by
that
the
starts.
arterial.
Yeah, they call it 115 there, and that's where it's Salt Point Turnpike.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if maybe it had something to do with the cows or
Yeah.
something like a salt liquor or something like that.
But
Yeah.
anyway, that's it.
So as you were growing up, you were up at your grandparents' house, and then, like, what about, like, you were talking earlier about up in Stanfordville? Like, what are your memories about going into Stanfordville as far as, like, the stores or the gas stations or?
I remember my grandparents were German people, and there was quite a few German families here in Stanford, especially up around Huns Lake. The Alfs, when I want names. Well, anyway, these German people used to make their own, they got together once a month. They went around to different houses, and I think there was four or five families. And I know we used to go with my grandparents when they went to the Alfs, and of course they had packed my jammers and a blanket, and I got put in bed after I had something to eat and go to sleep. And my grandfather played a squeeze box, and some of them had a violin, and they used to dance. I mean, there was, they had a good time for themselves. And of course, what else?
Were Stacks part of that group? Mr. and Mrs. Stacks from out on the...
Stats was in it, yes.
Yeah.
The German.
I'm just trying to think of the names up around the lake, too.
He was a carpenter. The son was a carpenter.
I know there was Wetter was up around the lake. There was Hawk or Houck, Hauck. There was that family. There was Dillinger's, but they would.
No, the Dillinger family wasn't in that.
No. I'm just trying to think of the other names. Well, there was Hun, but that was.
That's what I can't think of either. The
Yeah.
brain goes dead at my age.
There was I know Alling was up there. There was Bachmel.
No, that wasn't a name either.
There was a G. I can't think of what the name is that began with a G up there. Glassford. I know the Glassfords were up on Huns Lake, but those
Yeah.
those wouldn't be the right names for what you were talking about. So that was pretty interesting that there was a little group that would get together.
Yeah, well, they used to get together. And I think I was about 12 when my grandparents sold the farm there, and Peter Heinzone bought it at the time.
This is the one on Knight Road.
Yeah, on Knight Road. My grandparents, when my grandfather came over from Germany, he met Karn, is one of the families
yep.
too.
Yep.
And he met a Karn down there, and he was delivering ice and coal. And Grandpa hooked up with him for a while, and until my grandmother came over, they had to make enough money for her to come over. And they got married, and then Grandma worked for a lot of rich people. A lot of them were Jewish people. She learned a lot of recipes, so they opened when they got married, they opened a small deli in New York. And of course, sampling food, they got overweight, and my grandfather was told he had to give that up, or he wouldn't live long. So he came up, and that's when Karn had a place up on Huns Lake Road, and he came up, and they spent a weekend with them, and they went around looking at places for sale, and that's how they came to buy the place on Knight Road.
The Karn family, they're the ones that are related. They have the like Moose Karn and
Yeah.
Fred Karn.
Yeah, and there were two Fred Karns. They were cousins, and we used to get them mixed up, thinking which Fred belonged to Moose, But then when he got here on the farm and got behind a plow, that man got down to nothing, and I mean, he was humongous, And I got a picture of him and my grandmother when they were on the ferry in New York Harbor. Honestly, I mean, they were way overweight, but my grandfather was just flesh and bones as I remember him. But he
Hard
worked.
work.
Yeah. But my childhood was happy. I enjoyed it there on the farm, and I enjoyed going home. I used to ride the work horses here to Stanfordville, and back at Elvin's store there was a blacksmith.
Where the Quaker Meeting House is, on that property.
Yeah.
Yep.
And used to get the horses shoed. That was my job, taking the horses. They trusted me. We didn't have many cars on the road in that day, you know.
Right.
If they were a Ford of some kind, and people didn't drive fast like they didn't have the power that the cars have today. But then I used to take a horse too over to Clinton Corners to the blacksmith. And of course, while the horses were getting shoed, I went to my, see my mother and my sister and brothers and that. But I was 12, I think, 11 or 12 when I moved back to Clinton Corners. And I graduated here at 8th grade. They had a big ceremony
From
here.
this building?
Yeah.
And then where did you go to high school?
Yeah.
Did you go up to Pine Plains for high
Then
school?
I went to Pine Plains. Yeah.
Up in the old Seymour Smith
Yeah.
building?
Most all the kids from from Clinton Corners went to Pine Plains.
And that, we just talked to Kay Koch, and she was telling us about how she got to school, that Mr. Wright would pick them up.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get from Clinton Corners up here to school?
What became my brother-in-law was my bus driver. And I remember at the time he had a gray bus. We called it the cheese box. It wasn't big like the buses are. It was more like the smaller buses they have, only it wasn't as fancy looking. And he picked up people here in Stanfordville. We picked up people he had a bigger bus then, and he picked up people in Bangor, the Churtons, and the, what was it? Hortons, and Willigs, and that bunch, Carn. I remember there was a couple of boys that didn't behave themselves, and Henry put them off the bus up by where the polo fields are today, so they had to walk home. So the next morning, the boys were in Bangor waiting to get on the bus. He wouldn't let them on. He was punishing them for what they did on the bus, and I don't remember what it was anymore. It didn't mean anything, I guess, to me at the time. But then the hurricane in '38, of course, the new bridges were on Salt Point Road then, and we couldn't go over them. Did
they get washed out with the storm?
They had to do a lot of repair work on them. They weren't safe to go over with a bus, but we went over that old bridge, and we had to get out, walk across the bridge, get back on the bus, and that's the way it went until the other bridges were.
When you say the old bridge, is that the bridge that's off in the field there?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That was the old.
So they used the old bridge while they repaired the new ones?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and that was as safe as anything, and I mean, the storm didn't bite. But I don't think we got home from school. It was late anyway, and I mean, I know all the parents were shook up, and of course the phone lines were down, and there was no cell phones in those days.
So that storm hit like during the day on a school day?
Yeah, and then we had trees down. We had to wait for somebody to get the trees so the bus could go through, and it was raining cats and dogs, believe me, the wind blowing. It was kind of scary.
How old were you at that point?
In 38, let me see, I was a sophomore. So I must have been
About 14, maybe? 13, 14?
14, I guess.
Yeah, maybe 14 years old. So it was 1938.
Yeah. Because I graduated just before I was 18. And, but that was quite an experience that night. We talked about it for ages, you know. I guess a lot of buses had trouble getting kids home. So, but we went down, we had to go down to the falls, where the falls are, and take that road, Clinton Corners Road in.
Oh, down the falls, down on
Yeah.
82?
And that was iffy too, going over that bridge. But it was a bridge that had been there. And son of a gun, I think the people that built those bridges do a better job than what the ones do today. At least they're still standing,
Yeah. Yeah.
but now is there anything else?
I'm just trying to think of what else I can ask you about. School, we did the stores. What about the big storm in 1950? Do you remember that storm when that came through, when it kind of like wiped out the middle of Stanford?
There was that was in this during. I was married then. There was two storms together around that, and one hurricane right after the other. And there was a lot of water around. I know the meadow there by the house was all full of water. And the water was up to the cottages, some of the cottages there on the lower end of the lake.
Wow.
And when some of them built right along the lake, well, they built on a swamp. There was a swamp there. There used to be a picnic place there on Upton Lake too. You know, like you got here at the rec park. There was it had the siding and a roof on it and tables that you could picnic, you know, bring your picnic lunch there by the lake.
Whereabouts on the lake was that?
That was, well, there was a little stand there, that store that they had open in the summertime and fall or whatever. And then there was just to the north of that, there was this little swamp, and there was a bridge, and then there was dry land, and that's where the picnic area was, just north of that. And you know where the Egan's have their property on the lake?
Yeah.
Well, that was about there because that was dry land, but just to the south of it was a swamp, and they had a bridge over that to walk over that.
Isn't that kind of the area where there's like a public access to the lake, like for people on the lake? Down, because that's that little side road that goes in off of Grove that you're talking about.
Yeah,
if I have it right.
They're supposed to be 15 feet now. What is it? The fishing people, they have a plot of land there. But I don't live on that side of the lake,
Right.
but there's a lot of discourse going on. And I hear about it, but I let people in on my side of the lake to go fishing.
Right.
And, but I mean, they're people I know, and they're respectful of the land and everything, and
Right.
so.
The whistle stop at Willowbrook, it would be Salt Point Turnpike and Willowbrook Road. There was like a whistle stop there for the train?
Yes, there was. There was a little building there too, and I imagine it let people off.
Where did
don't
that
forget Market Road goes in there too.
Right. Where did that train then headed into Stanfordville from that
Yeah,
location?
yeah. It's the one that came over. What's the one where Rita Mary lives on?
Gristmill.
Yeah, it was that
Oh,
one.
it was the one that ran, oh, okay.
Oh, and it came in, to the station down there.
Where was that bridge then? You know how you were talking about
And then there's one come from Hibernia.
Oh, the train out of Hibernia?
Yeah, that came in there. And that came on the other side of, come in by Buys, the back of Buys.
Gas station?
Yeah,
Old gas station
that's
there?
where that came in.
Because you could see the remnants of that track in
Yeah.
there. So,
Yep.
so that came, so basically that track crossed Saw Point Turnpike.
They must have joined somewhere in there.
Huh. I just drew a blank. I was going to ask you a question. I had it in my head.
And then, do you know the Pinkmans? They had was a hotel like?
On Depot Lane.
Yeah.
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 And actually, Kay Koch's family bought that building.
Yeah.
So, I know what I was going to ask you. Up in Anson's Crossing, Hyatt's. Did you ever have any kind of, contact with the Hyatt family that lived up there?
What was the name?
Photographer, Egbert Hyatt, Hyatt. They had the boarding house there, right where the stop was in Anson Crossing.
No, because we picked people up right there where the road joins Anson Road.
Right.
The train stopped and let them off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their house was just
Yeah.
up from there. They had a boarding house
Yeah.
also. So, what about the train? Were there any accidents with the trains when you?
Not that I know of. And then there was, when I was growing up, there was a Tunaville.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That went daily, back and forth. You could go to Poughkeepsie. How I know about that, I was living home then, and my sister, we had Scarlet Tina. Do you ever hear of that? Mm-hmm. And it left my sister with something with her ears, and she had to, 3 times a week we did the Tunaville into Poughkeepsie. She had to go to the ear doctor. So, but I always liked riding on that. I mean, it was just a single.
Just like a trolley, pretty much.
Yeah,
Just like
yeah,
a trolley car going.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, as far as the doctor, did you come up into Bangor to the doctor?
Yeah, Dr. Berry is the first one I remember. There was a doctor right at the foot of Jameson Hill, too. Well, I can't remember his name. But anyway, there was a doctor there, and I guess he retired and moved away. But
the doctor in Stanfordville, was the doctor in Bangor, or was...
No, he was in Bangor, where, what's his name lives.
John Quinn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where they were. And then the other doctor come in there. Jerry. Yeah. Oh, and there was a Dr. Richards right next to the firehouse. Not the new house that was built in between, but the other house. He was the one that used to every year come up and examine all of us or whatever.
Up at the school for your school physicals?
His name was Dr. Richardson.
And then the library too, there was the library was in that little building there at the bottom of the town hall hill.
No.
There was,
we used to go up to Bullis Hall we went up twice a week. We used to walk up, rain, shine, snow, hail, whatever, and play basketball or whatever we did, for exercise. And of course, we had recess here, and we used to play all sorts of games, Red Rover and hopscotch and all that stuff. And you don't see that anymore,
No.
all those games.
When you got married, where did you get married?
In the French church. It was the French church at the time. Yeah. And we got married in 1945, February 4th.
And before the war ended.
Hmm?
Actually, before the war ended, you got married.
That married. Oscar came home on leave, and he never went back, and he was just out on the ocean going back when the war ended. And then he never got home until February. Not February, September. So, yeah.
But good life up here. Nice life, right?
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah. I wouldn't give it up for anything. For all the money in the world. I mean, I enjoyed what I had to do. Had a big garden. Did a lot of freezing. First off, a lot of canning. And I often wonder these hot days, how the heck I worked over a wood-burning stove. But, you know, you survive, and now the heat gets me. Back then, apparently, when you're younger, it doesn't bother you.